Hi, welcome to you, those of you that are on so far. We'll give it just another couple minutes and then we'll kick it off. Okay, it's 5 after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
I want to just say thank you to everybody for joining us today. This is our first professional series business webinar sponsored by My Care Alliance. And for those of you that don't know me, I am Ginger Jones. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders. And if you're not familiar, My Care Alliance is on a mission to support other small businesses across the country that provide services in advocacy, care management, adult daycare, and home care. And as part of that mission, we have partnered with expert partners and established some relationships that we feel these partners will offer you key resources and really help assure success for your companies. Over the last decade in practicing care management and advocacy, one of the recurrent questions that I've come up against with colleagues in my field is, as a small business owner, how does HIPAA really apply to me? What am I really required to do? So I'm really pleased today to introduce you to our first speaker, and that is Mr. Brian Tuttle. Brian has over 20 years of experience in health IT with multiple certifications and hands-on knowledge. He serves as a compliance consultant and has conducted on-site remote risk assessments for over 100 medical practices, hospitals, health departments, insurance plans, and business associates throughout the United States. In addition, he has served in multiple litigated court cases involving expert witnesses, offering input related to best practices and requirements for securing and providing patient access to protected health information. He has worked directly with the Office of Civil Rights, both defending covered entities and business associates, as well as being asked by the federal government to audit these entities and associates on behalf of the OCR. He holds certifications as a professional in health IT, certified HIPAA professional, certified HIPAA administrator, certified business resilience auditor, and a certified information systems professional. So Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Again, my name's Brian Tuttle, obviously, and been doing this for quite some time, really since 1996 when the HIPAA regulations originally came out. And of course, throughout the years, they've changed and morphed, and of course started adding business associates, and that really began in 2003, where if you're privy to protected health information to perform a job function on behalf of a covered entity, that sort of puts us in that realm. So one point I want to make first is, in this country, there are about 10 times as many business associates as there are covered entities. Covered entities, of course, being providers of care, such as doctors' offices, pharmacies, hospitals, outpatient facilities, nursing homes, any type of group providing care, and also payment for care, as in insurance plans and clearinghouses. Business associates would be those 1099s working with those groups, like an IT company, a medical billing company, medical transcription group, a credentialing group. And it goes on and on and on. And there are about, again, 10 times as many ancillary groups as there are covered entities in this country. And that's, of course, what we're going to be focusing on primarily today, and also about some just best practices in general when dealing with sensitive data and sensitive information. So real quick, just a little background. I am using pictures through this. HIPAA is always a dry subject matter, so it tends to help. Now, when we think of HIPAA historically, it's really left us alone. like many federal regulations, the law was on the books, but was it really being enforced back in the old days? No, not really. Very rarely did you see a group being fined or audited all the way from 1996 up until really around 2013, in the end of 2013, and they really started doing something about it. So around that time, in late 2013, known as the HIPAA Final Omnibus Rule, the federal government decided that something needed to be done here. And it was a bipartisan thing, too. This is one of the few areas those politicians actually agree on up there in Washington, is more needs to be done to better protect American health information. Because historically, healthcare and health information has been a leaking bucket of identity theft, of fraud, of data breach, because there was no real regulation, no real enforcement of the regulation anyway, to do anything about this. So they've gotten really aggressive here. So no longer are we the little kangaroo hopping around. We are now the kangaroo, and with a little help of Photoshop, the federal government and the trial attorneys being the shark. So if we're negligent in our responsibility dealing with sensitive protected health information, not only can the federal government fine us heavily, and I'll show you some of the recent fines here in a little bit, but we can also be sued under whatever state you live in, those laws of negligence. And that's something that's relatively new. A lot of folks don't realize. So let's talk a minute about the final omnibus rule, which occurred, and this was roughly 7 years ago, quite some time ago, but this is when the snowball started to crescendo down the hill. Penalties were increased, and the next point is very critical to understand. And we'll get into the point here shortly, is are we a business associate, yes or no? But the burden is equal now between covered entities and business associates. So what I mean by that is, if you're a business associate, like let's just say you're a medical billing company, and you notice that your client, the doctor's office, is letting you into their system through non-secured means, for example, like an unencrypted port open on a firewall, or giving you weak access controls like username admin, password, or giving you one username and password for all 6 of your members to share into an EMR system, there are multiple problems here. And our job as a business associate, by law, we have to say, whoa, we can't access you that way. This isn't compliant. It's a bidirectional responsibility. If we see our client doing something in a non-compliant manner, we have to either tell them to change, or we can't do business with them. And obviously that's a catch-22 because they're our client and they're paying us, but it's one of those things where you would say, for example, whoa, don't be emailing us substance abuse records non-encrypted from that Yahoo account. That's too sensitive. That must be encrypted, or we cannot accept it. Things of that nature. So again, bidirectional responsibility. It's always been the other way around. This basically enforced what was already on the books for covered entities, greatly enforced and increased proactive federal audits. And 2020 is no different. Even with COVID-19, these audits are going on. They're still occurring. In fact, at a higher rate. They're doing desk audits. Now, there has been a few of the standards lifted a little bit relating to telemedicine under HIPAA, and we're going to have a whole nother webinar on that later. I won't get mired down into that, but just because this is going on does not mean the Federal Office for Civil Rights is not going through and doing their enforcement. And every single year since 2013, the fines have doubled. 2014 doubled 13, and on and on and on. 2 reasons why. Number 1, the federal government is enforcing the law. That's the primary reason. They are proactively auditing people. Number 2, the individual remedy, and this is a big, big deal. Individuals get nothing from, no matter how big the fine is that the federal government doles out. Individuals get nothing. However, the federal government wanted to fix that, so they told all 50 states to implement law of remedy so you can sue under the state law but you still must file the complaint first with the federal government and use that, the fact that this was indeed a HIPAA violation, as the fuel or the foundation of the state case. And unfortunately, we live in a very litigious country. Just go down the interstate, billboard after billboard after billboard is attorney, 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 and then maybe a real estate agent, then an attorney and attorney. So this is a litigious country, and this has definitely increased the amount of complaints that OCR gets under HIPAA, and OCR investigates literally every complaint that they get. And of course, when I say OCR, I'm referring to the Office for Civil Rights, whom is part of the Health and Human Services. It's the Office for Civil Rights that enforces HIPAA, because it's a federal civil right every American enjoys, that your health record be secured as well as accessible. So historically, it's been benign, no real consequences for actions, more of a nuisance than a real problem. Fines were low and rare, audits were extremely rare, and only the federal government could assess fines, and that's still the case. Federal government assesses these giant fines. What they do with all that money, I have no idea, but the individuals get nothing, not until they go under their state. So audits have begun in earnest, big, small, short, and tall. Does not matter your size and scope, and it is the smaller, statistically, the smaller medical providers and the business associates that fare worse under audit, statistically, than the larger groups. I think everyone understands personal responsibility here, whether we be a covered entity or a business associate. We are legally required to, if I make a disclosure of someone's health information without any reason to do so, technically that's against the law. If I even go into someone's health record just being nosy, that carries up to 1 year in federal prison for me and a $50,000 fine. If I go into someone's health information with false pretenses, that carries up to 5 years and a $100,000 fine. If I go into someone's health information and maliciously slander them, steal their identities, sell their information, that carries up to 10 years and a $250,000 fine. And there's been quite a bit of this that has occurred, and I've worked in a lot of cases where this has happened. So our job as a small business, if covered under HIPAA, is to make sure that we educate staff on this. They understand and they sign off on confidentiality agreements, because if we don't, and a staff member does something really stupid, yeah, they're going to get in some big trouble, but we could be sued for negligence under the state and hit with a HIPAA fine if we can't prove they were properly educated on this. Again, I don't think that's a big deal. Most folks understand that. Can we be fined for HIPAA violations even if a breach doesn't occur? Yes. So if we're a business associate and we're audited, one of the first questions the federal government's going to ask is, submit to us your most recent enterprise-wide risk assessment. When was it done? Was it done in the last year? If you can't provide that, possibly be fined, because that's a requirement. Now, if you're a really, really small business, like one person, you just fix computers, but you're privy to health information and going into someone's clinic fixing computers, a bit lower risk, but you still need to have some kind of acknowledgement, some kind of assessment of those risks, no matter how small it is. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. Now, a business associate, by definition, can be as little as one guy and can be as big as Microsoft or Amazon Web Services. It can be massive or it can be very small. They are individuals or entities who create, receive, maintain, or store protected health information on behalf of a covered entity. Now, create, receive, maintain, or store. That could be a data center, an off-site data center. You use Joe Blow's data center to host your servers because they're maintaining the stuff. If you're a IT company developing an app, like some kind of software, like texting, HIPAA compliant texting software, you would be a business associate because you're typically transmitting that information. If a medical transcription company, certainly, an answering service. If you're taking calls from a clinic and you're clearly privy to protected health information. Medical transcription, of course, an IT group, almost always, if they're working on those systems and maintaining those systems, are going to be privy to health information. Medical billing companies, certainly. An attorney, many attorneys' offices would fall under this because they are privy to protected health information in many, many different situations. A shredding service, they would be a business associate. So bottom line, if you are privy to protected health information to perform the job function of a 1099 on behalf of a covered entity, you would fall under that umbrella and thus be required to sign a business associate agreement and make sure that you are complying with HIPAA, that you would notify the covered entity in the event of a breach and things of that nature. Now, these days, and remember what I said earlier, the federal government has gotten really aggressive about enforcement of these HIPAA laws. So there are about 7 million business associates in the United States. The government's goal, if it's to better secure American health information, they need to know where it is. A lot of people wonder, well, how would they know where all these 7 million business associates are? Well, here's what they're doing. They've been sending out thousands of letters, both through email and regular U.S. mail, to primarily covered entities. And from the covered entities, it's a request for information. They say, submit to us a detailed list of all of your business associates, 2 points of contact, where they're located, what they do for you, email address, all this information. And they're very clear about it. We want to review these business associates to make sure that they are complying with this, because if the goal is to better protect this information, they need to make sure that those who have it are complying. Now, if you're just one person that just, like I said, fixes computers in doctor's office, you're not going to get audited. We're talking about somewhat larger groups, several employees that has that's especially if you're storing the information or you're receiving the information from covered entities like doctor's offices, and you're definitely at a higher risk there. Thus, you should conduct a risk assessment and put in policies. Hence why businesses today, if you fall under that category, must develop policies and procedures for HIPAA specific to your risks. Now, your policies and procedures for HIPAA as a business are going to be entirely different than what a medical practice would look like, because policy and procedure gets written based upon your risks. A business is going to, a lot of the HIPAA standards wouldn't apply. Now, they're not all going to apply, but we still need to address why they don't apply and put policies in place for the ones that do apply. It's very critical. Train the staff for your risks. Train your staff for your risks. Conduct your own risk assessments. Of course, businesses are subject to federal inspection now. And as I mentioned earlier, we must monitor covered entities where a business associate agreement exists. And if you're a business associate, let's say you're a medical billing company and you outsource to a collection agency. You outsource to a collection agency to help you with the billing, or you outsource to some other group to help you do the actual billing. They become your business associate, and they have to sign your business associate agreement. If there's a breach, that contractor would have to notify you. You then would notify the covered entity. A business would never directly notify the patient. The covered entity is the one that does that. Now, one thing, as I mentioned, monitoring covered entities where a business associate agreement exists. And staff need to be trained on this and need to be made aware. If you ever notice a customer, meaning a covered entity like a doctor's office or hospital, working in a non-compliant manner in the way in which you guys do business together. You don't have to monitor all they're doing. I'm just talking about how you guys work together. It is the legal responsibility of the business associate not to work with that client in that manner unless they fix the problem. So, for an example, as I mentioned earlier, the customer is emailing the business HIV records non-encrypted. The customer is allowing your business into their system through some non-encrypted port like Microsoft Remote Desktop open to a public IP address. Now, I know that's a bit of geek speak, but that's very bad. The customer giving one shared username and password to the business for access into an EMR when you have 5 people working the account. If you've got 5 people working the account, you need 5 individual usernames and passwords into that EMR. Bobby, Sue, Joe, Jenny, and Robert need all of their individual logins because under HIPAA, by law, we have to audit what every user is doing. The system does. That's how they're designed. Now, with that stated, although the federal government, Uncle Sam, poses a risk to business associates, the real risk tends to be this. Covered entities these days, and when business associates come to me and guys like me, it's not because the federal government's breathing down their neck so much. Every once in a while, but here's what's happening. Businesses are getting these giant questionnaires from covered entities, above and beyond just signing that business associate agreement. These big questionnaires, they want to see proof that you've done a risk assessment. They want to see proof that you've got policies for this. They want to see that because part of it is their cyber liability insurance policies require them to vet their business partners. Part of it also is just plain old general liability because remember, if a covered entity works with an incompetent contractor, the contractor has a big breach, it's the covered entity that has to notify their patients, and it's a very bad look, and it puts egg on their face, even though it may not have been their fault at all. And there can be some liability in that if the covered entity did not vet that contractor appropriately. So that's what I'm seeing a whole lot of. So my opinion is, are we a business associate? Are we not a business associate? If you're dealing with protected health information, and you really, in my opinion, should become HIPAA compliant, because HIPAA compliance in the end is nothing but a bunch of common sense. It really is. You just sort of need to write it down in policy, write down a lot of the good stuff you're already doing, write down and brag on the good stuff you're already doing. That's a lot of what this is. So back to the point of protected health information. What is protected health information? And here's the thing, protected health information, it can be very, very nominal. And protected health information certainly is not created the same. So what I mean by that, let's just look at the definition. Patient identifiable health information that's transmitted or maintained in any form or medium. It can be electronic, oral, or paper by a covered entity or one of its business associates, excluding certain educational and employment records. So employment records don't fall under HIPAA. Now, in order to be completely de-identified, all of these bullet points have to be removed. Name, a street address, city, county, precinct, zip code, dates directly related to an individual, like the birth date, admission date, discharge date, date of death, phone numbers, fax numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, medical record numbers, health plan beneficiary numbers, account numbers, certificate license numbers, even the VIN number on your car, believe it or not. And the reason being, because the way this might come up would be maybe in an attorney working in some auto wreck deal, because the VIN number is public domain. You can look a VIN number up and find out who owns it. License plate number, device identifiers and serial numbers, web addresses, IP addresses, biometrics like a finger and voice print, and a full face photographic image. So as you can see, for example, health information is not created the same. A medical record number, all by its lonesome, all by itself, is considered protected health information. However, it would be generally acceptable to email just a medical record number without encryption, because common sense, reasonable and appropriate, and risk dictates that even if it was intercepted, what's the person going to do with it that intercepted it? They would have to hack the EMR to figure out who on earth that is. That's typically acceptable to transmit. That's why transmitting protected health information, it's not required to be encrypted, but if we're not encrypting, we have to explain why we aren't, and the reasons why. Well, because we only send extremely nominal amounts of information. However, you would never send a substance abuse record or something like that non-encrypted for the obvious reasons. They're two different animals. Now, a breach. What constitutes a breach? That would be any impermissible use or disclosure of PHI that is presumed to be a breach with a subsequent requirement to notify, unless that we demonstrate, we would investigate. You would need to have like a breach incident investigation form to where we're going to conclude, yes, it was a breach, no, it wasn't a breach, but the burden is on us to prove that it was not a breach or prove that it was and we did notify. And then you document that. And by the way, breaches occur all the time. HIPAA, this law is not intended to cripple our ability to function under healthcare. The goal is a principles-based goal. The whole goal is to put in reasonable and appropriate common sense safeguards. So you would need to investigate. What was the information involved? What was the identifiers? Was it just a medical record number? Was it just an X-ray of a bicuspid tooth? Or was it, an HIV record or a name, address, social security number, credit card number? That's really sensitive stuff. The X-ray of a bicuspid tooth, far less sensitive, but still a breach, although fairly nominal. Even if the mailman screwed up and took Billy Bob's health record to Jim's house, and then Jim makes us aware of it, then we need to notify Billy Bob that happened. But that would fall more on a covered entity, not so much a business associate. But again, we would need to investigate what happened, how did it happen. Here's what we're going to do going forward to lower that from happening again. Maybe we need to retrain on this particular area. But again, breaches are going to happen. Now, as I mentioned, the fines and the amount of complaints have just been shooting through the roof, primarily due to proactive enforcement of the law and the individual remedy, which has increased individuals filing complaints. The amount of fines is going straight up at a 45-degree angle. 2019 doubled 18, just as at 18 it did 17, 16, 15, 14. We assume 2020 will be more than 2019. Now, it is the Office for Civil Rights that enforces HIPAA. Another question I get about this a lot is political. So if one party's in power, are they more likely to enforce certain regulations or not other regulations? Maybe, I don't know, but this particular regulation, it really doesn't matter, because these decisions are made by career staff that really aren't affected by political change. The only political appointee that has much to do with this is Roger Severino, because the OCR director is appointed by the president. Now, he basically, when he took office, I plan to maintain the same programmatic focus as my predecessor in terms of enforcement of these laws, and it hasn't skipped a beat. There's his bio. No need to go through all this. Very smart fella. Harvard Law, went to Carnegie Mellon, Southern Cal, way smarter than me. Very competent fella. But let's just look at real quick what many assume is an anti-regulatory director. Maybe he is, I don't know, but in this area, that is just not the case. Again, this is not one of those areas you got the bickering. I want to show you the most recent fines. These are just awful. And I've seen fines much bigger than these, much, much bigger. Bottom line is this: it's negligence. This is not rocket science. It really isn't. HIPAA compliance is a bunch of common sense. And when you see these gigantic fines, it's due to negligence. This Presence Health got a big one because paper-based operating room schedules went missing. They knew they went missing and they didn't notify. This insurance company in Puerto Rico got a very large fine because they put health information on an unencrypted USB drive and it was stolen. The reason they got such a big fine is because they claimed they had been doing their risk assessments. They were compliant with this stuff, but the government calls their bluff and says, well, show it to us. They didn't have it. And by the way, never, ever, ever put any protected health information on a non-encrypted portable drive. Ever, 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 ever. That's the number 2 way health records are breached in America. Number 1 is ransomware and hacking, which we'll talk about in a minute. So regardless if you fall under the purview of a business associate or not, don't put sensitive information on a portable USB drive, smartphone, laptop, anything unless the device is encrypted or you put it within an encrypted folder on the device. I'll get into more of that later. Children's Medical of Dallas, same thing, 3.2. I mean, look at these fines. These are horrible, horrible fines just for pure negligence, which could have so easily been avoided. They didn't get the fine so much because the breach occurred. They got it because they had nothing in place prior to the breach occurring. Memorial Healthcare System, they got a $5.5 million fine. You're talking about thousands of staff members, and they weren't removing people out of their cloud-based EMR when they were terminated. They had terrible termination procedures. They weren't reviewing those access lists to make sure they were accurate. Again, common IT stuff that bad HR and IT communications, that should be with any business. And I mean, this stuff is serious business. So you've got to be proactive, get that stuff in place before some kind of big problem like this occurs. Now, the most common compliance issues investigated: impermissible uses and disclosures of protected health information, lack of safeguards of protected health information, lack of allowing patient access to their protected health information. That's more going to fall on a covered entity, though. Business associate typically would not be directly facing with the patient. Lack of administrative safeguards. That would mean not having a risk management plan, not doing risk assessments, not training staff members, not hiring good people, not background checking people before you give them access to all this sensitive data, having bad termination procedures, things of that nature. Use or disclosure of more than the minimum necessary. For example, and that goes across the board. If minimum necessary, if someone requests an x-ray of the ulnar bone, you only send the ulnar bone, assuming it's not encrypted, and nothing more. You don't need to add more than the necessary. Or in an ER, would be a violation of minimum necessary for a nurse to say, doctor, put your gloves on, he's got hepatitis, because this actually happened because the policies to wear gloves anyway, but that's what minimum necessary is. Now, real quick about suing. Now, regardless if we fall, whether you're a business associate or covered entity, if you're dealing with sensitive data, and we can split hairs on, are we a business associate? Maybe you're on the borderline. But if you're dealing with sensitive data, with customer data, sensitive data, you have liability. And I've worked with groups who don't necessarily fall under HIPAA. I've worked with jail systems even that just want to be compliant with this because it's best practices and see where their risks are and how they can better protect this stuff. Because a little change that occurred in 2013 about the individual remedy. Now, to be clear, there is no private cause of action under HIPAA. That's a federal law. That's a federal law. No one has a right of remedy under that. Congress never included that. As nasty as these penalties are, both civil and criminal, under the federal law, there is no individual remedy, as I mentioned, but they changed that in a tangential manner because they told all 50 state attorney generals to implement law of remedy regarding that. And it took a while for it to trickle down, but I personally worked in something like 31 different states as expert witness, deposition, on trial, dealing with the federal law as it relates to that case of negligence dealing with someone's sensitive health information. Now, no one is going to win a remedy because some very, very nominal information has been breached, like the x-ray of their tooth. But the dental office could certainly be fined for not keeping that stuff adequately secured, or some business associates, some medical transcription company could be held accountable for not keeping information secured, or across the board, it doesn't matter. We are required to keep sensitive information secured to reasonable and appropriate levels. Now, the biggest risk that we face, in where a lot of groups fall short, is educating staff members on common sense IT. Every single staff member, from the board of directors down to the part-time, part-time biller or whatever, need to be trained on common sense IT. All the technology in the world, having great firewalls, great antivirus, anti-spam, all this stuff will not fix human stupidity. And due to COVID-19, many of us are working from home. Many of us were sent home in sort of an ad hoc manner without IT having the time to provision the network, to make sure the computer's safe and got good, decent, antivirus, to see if the home-based firewall is any good. So these hackers know that, and unfortunately, this is just going through the roof now. And what they try to do is trick us humans, rather than necessarily writing a virus. Email spoofing. Everyone should be educated that if you ever received an email from, say, the business owner, the CEO, whoever, saying, hey, I'm locked out of, they'll even figure out what system you're using. I'm locked out of the next gen EMR, or I'm locked out of the Salesforce. Can you provide me your username and password so I can log in? I don't want to bother IT. Well, that's your boss that sent that. Oh yeah, here you go. Well, if that person replied, then you're doomed. You're doomed. Somebody pretty soon after, probably in Russia, is going to be requesting you pay them X amount of Bitcoin, or they're going to take all that data or post it all online. So that's email spoofing. Now, a little trick, you can hover your mouse over that and it'll tell you the origin of where that email came from, but never ever transmit your access controls like that. Cyber attacks, clearly the number one way health records are breached in America. If you go at the OCR's portal, it will give you a list of all the, any group that's had a breach of over 500 individuals, you have to be put on this web page, and there's hundreds and hundreds of groups listed here. All I did was sort by the largest breaches ever. And you can see what type, was it a healthcare provider or was it a business associate? And a lot of business associates have had some gigantic breaches. Looking through here, Science Application International, Community Health Systems, Professional Services, Medical Informatics, all kinds of stuff. And theft, it's either loss or theft of a non-encrypted portable device or a hacking/IT incident, probably ransomware. And real quick about ransomware, I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but this is a nasty virus that comes through email, comes through those fake emails that look like they come from Microsoft, PayPal, Apple, Bank of America, Facebook, trying to get you to click on a link. You click on the link, it downloads a malicious virus. It's actually malware. What it's looking for folders on your desktop. It's going to attack every one. it's going to encrypt each folder. Anything you're connected to, it's going to travel through, get onto the servers, attack the file shares on the servers. It's also looking for databases. If you're connected to some kind of server with a database running some kind of system, it's going to attack the database and it's going to encrypt it. Now you can't get any of your data back because it's all been hijacked, and they're going to want you to pay them X amount of Bitcoin. Problem with this is the federal government made it official. If you get one of these attacks and it attaches to a folder, file share, or database that has health information in it, that's a reportable breach, unless the stuff is already encrypted. So make sure on your laptops, whatever you're dealing with, any sensitive customer data, whatever you're doing, if you're downloading it to, say, a laptop, make sure you put it in an encrypted folder. It's very easy to do. That way, if you did get one of these, it wouldn't be a breach. And if you have some kind of database, if you work in an environment where you have a server there, make sure that the database is encrypted. That's more of a IT thing. It's not required, just highly suggested. And make sure you use good paid antivirus. Don't use some cheap free version of some kind of antivirus. Use a good paid, it's like $40 a year for a good paid antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spam, and it's a whole lot more robust and secure than just the cheap free versions of stuff. So a couple of risk factors here. Watch out for weird looking emails. Make sure your stuff's backed up, of course. Make sure you have an off-site backup as well. Maybe it's a cloud backup, you back up to the cloud, that's fine. Make sure you do all those updates, your antivirus, your browser, get the latest and greatest updates, and do not use Windows 7. Windows 7 is not supported anymore. Do not use that anymore. Make sure access controls are in place. Passwords should be at least 8 characters and complex. And when you work with covered entities, make sure when they give you access to their systems that they're providing you with good, strong access controls, at least 8 characters and complex on the password. And if you guys let contractors in, you need to also vet your contractors. Make sure that, if you outsource something, that the individuals you're giving access, assuming they're accessing, health information, that they're accessing through solid access controls. Watch out for weird websites, good physical access controls. Don't leave passwords laying around on sticky notes, things of that nature, and never email your username, password, or text or anything like that. Pick up the phone and call them, or if you do email it, make sure it's encrypted. And real quick about a social engineering example, phishing, that's what we're talking about. These are fake emails that look like they come from legitimate organizations. They try to use fear or a sense of urgency to get you to click on a link. You've seen these, I promise. Here's an example of one from Facebook trying to say that we have some kind of copyright problem on our Facebook page. Click on the link or you will be permanently blocked, and then from Facebook. So if you click on the link, you end up downloading some kind of malicious malware or get redirected for it to steal your identity. So if you receive an email like that, pick up the phone, call. Don't give offers from strangers the benefit of the doubt. They seem too good to be true. They probably are. Lock the machine when you're away from the workstation. And we're all responsible here under this law. And again, we're any type of sensitive data. So if you're trying to figure out, am I a business associate? The answer is quite simple. Are you privy to protected health information to perform your job on behalf of another business associate, perhaps, or on behalf of a outpatient facility, nursing home, home health care? If you're seeing that information, if you're physically working with patients, then you would, or physically working on the, I guess, the back office on patient. A business associate's not going to be one that's providing care to a patient. That would put you in more of a covered entity. The business associate's going to be more one that provides sort of more back office types of services to those who do provide care, or to insurance plans and things of that nature. But regardless if we are a business associate or a covered entity, the same basic things apply. The only difference is breach notification. A covered entity would be the one notifying the patient. The business associate would be the one notifying the covered entity. Now, everyone needs to understand everything we do under our username in any of these systems is our responsibility. Make sure handheld phones, laptops, if they store health information, are encrypted. Know where you're sending information before you send it. Closed programs are not in use. And social media, that's a big, big problem. Absolutely no protected health information should ever be on social media. Staff should be trained not to be taking selfies at work with patients or anything like that, even though a business associate, this is a bit of a lower risk, but you certainly wouldn't want to put any kind of protected health information on social media. You can do that if there's consent from the patient, written consent, for example. I mean, this normally would be for medical practices like, you know, the new teeth whitening solution or acne treatment, patient before and after, those sorts of things, if the patient consents. Do not text protected health information ever, unless it's directly to patient with consent. If you want to text, you're going to have to use a third-party encryption program to do that. That is new, completely forbidden now by the federal government. Some people ask, well, why can we email non-encrypted if it's, you know, nominal information, but we can't text anything? Here's why. Because texting, the protocols in which transmit it versus the protocols in which transmit an email are day and night. It's 50 times easier to intercept a text message. Someone could be sitting in your parking lot with a packet sniffer on their tablet, their laptop, their smartphone, and intercept texts all around them. Therefore, the federal government says this is no longer reasonable and appropriate. Now, again, a provider can text with a patient if the patient consents into receiving that. But if you guys want to text with each other, you're going to have to download a third-party app. There's a lot of them out there, specifically made for HIPAA. They're very cheap, not a lot of money, you know, $5 a month or something like that. They're not that expensive, but that's how it's going to have to be done. Personal devices, again, whether you're, you know, a lot of businesses, especially small businesses these days, this is becoming the norm rather than the exception, is to use personal devices. Is that against HIPAA? No, it's not. But we just need to, you know, look at some common sense factors here. Don't allow PHI to be written to a local personal device if possible. You don't want people downloading protected health information to that laptop. However, if you're in home health, sometimes you're going to the patient's house. Sometimes you don't have internet access. You can't get to, say, some cloud-based EMR if you need to get to that, and you need to download. That's fine, but if you're downloading to the local machine, make sure that either that local machine is hardware encrypted, or you're putting that information into a folder that's encrypted. Or if it's only one, say, spreadsheet, you could encrypt the single spreadsheet. That's file level encryption. And of course, if you're using that machine to download health information on it, make sure it's got good, competent antivirus on it, and you know, in the updates and the firewalls turned on and those sorts of things. Make sure latest and greatest updates on smartphones if you're using those as well, and of course, turn the PIN or the biometrics on the smartphone. That goes without saying. If you're not putting a PIN on your phone or using biometrics like a thumbprint or facial recognition, you're crazy, because if that phone was lost and it was not encrypted, whoever gets it is going to know where you live. They're going to get in all your email. They're going to know more about you statistically than if they broke into your house and rummaged through your things. So very, very important to make sure those, beyond HIPAA, to make sure those are secured. Your number one compliance worry, of course, with portable devices, it's going to be theft or loss. So most important, encrypt things. Make sure encryption is enabled. You can also turn some other technologies on, remote tracking. You can allow like another phone to find your iPhone or Android, whatever you use. You can remote disable the things, but most importantly is to encrypt it with a PIN or password. Make sure and do that. So encrypt anything that has health information at rest, because if you guys are working for covered entities, the last thing you want is to have a breach, because you're going to have to, by law, notify them that this happened, and they're not going to be happy. So make sure it's secured. Make sure stuff that you're keeping is secured physically. Now, there's plenty of other breaches that don't have to be technological. You know, verbal, to have verbal breaches. You could have a paper breach. So if you do keep paper, if you print paper or whatever at your home office with health information on it, my opinion is you're better off getting that scanned, keep it in electronic form and keep it encrypted, plus it's backed up, and then shred the paper. And you would never want to keep keep paper records stored in a home office unless adequately protected. And transmitting health information, ideally, we want to encrypt it, but it's not required via email, but you always want to abide by the minimum necessary policy. At your home network, make sure that you're using encrypted wireless as well, which I don't think is a big risk these days. Now, real quick, a few factors that could spurn a federal audit. Well, internal staff, we're made up of people. If you're outsourcing or using subcontractors, are you vetting them? Bad customers. If you work with a covered entity and they get hammered for some massive breach, there's a strong chance that the OCR is going to look at their contractors, their business associates. If you've had a previous large breach, not reporting a breach is very dangerous, and having a bad disaster recovery plan. And for some businesses, this isn't really going to apply. The whole concept of disaster recovery is the fact that patients have a federal civil right of access to their health record. We must be able to provide that even in the event a disaster occurs. But that's going to fall usually, not always, but 90% of the time on the covered entity. So again, I mentioned this earlier, small providers in terms of who's failing in these federal, who's having the biggest problems, small providers. Healthcare providers in general and their business associates have had more issues in clearinghouses or insurance plans, and it is the HIPAA security rule, which is the security of electronic protected health information, that's the biggest concern. Most business associates don't even deal with the HIPAA privacy rule, really, because you're not directly working with the patients. You're not directly working with the patients. You're working in the background. So typically businesses only deal with the HIPAA security rule, not so much the privacy rule. So more specifically drilling down, these are federal statistics, risk assessment not done. That's the most critical point. That's the building blocks of everything else. You get your policies written based upon the findings. You'll figure out if staff's been trained adequately through the assessment. You'll figure out if you've got an adequate contingency plan to function or when data is down. You'll figure out if your systems are designed, if they're storing health information, are the systems designed appropriately. Breach notification or weak IT support. So a few things real quick, and then we'll wrap this up for questions. Never share passwords into systems that maintain protected health information like an EMR. You don't want to have 15 administrators into some kind of system. Keep the passwords at least 8 characters and complex. Back stuff up, even just your business data. Make sure you have that a cloud backup just in case. Lock screens. There's no setting for this, no set number, but depends on risk. Depends on if it's in a high risk area. You want to have a short auto lock. Don't send sensitive emails without encryption, and never send text with any PHI without encryption unless it's directly to the patient. If you use subcontractors, make sure you vet them, make sure they're competent before you share that information with them. Keeping physical security of any network servers if you're using them. Keeping paper-based secured. Keeping your screens turned in a physical way to lower risk of incidental visual disclosures. And as I mentioned, your clients, the covered entities not complying, and you're clearly aware of it in the way in which you do business. And ignorance of common sense IT security. Being professional, keeping voice levels low, no gossip about anything we've seen at any client, lack of adequate paperwork or outdated paperwork, like confidentiality agreements, policies. And do you need an alarm system if you have a physical location? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the situation. System auditing. If you use a system, if you have like a database you keep your client information in, is that system able to track user actions within it? External media, is it encrypted? Again, who's coming in remotely? When we remote access, is it secured? Do you keep any historical records of patient information? If so, where is that kept? And always abide by the minimum necessary, and always encrypt data at rest. Make sure you've got good antivirus. Make sure you've got good firewalls. And this would be more at a business location. Lack of risk assessments, lack of written policy specific to your business. And so little resources, always fact check. HHS.gov is the governing body for HIPAA. Watch out for snake oil, a lot of snake oil out there. Folks trying to sell you something you don't need. Bottom line, we're not expected to be perfect. This is a quote from HHS. We're expected to follow these standards, implement proper policies, procedures, and technologies that to make the shoe fit the foot, and reasonably show we're making an effort to protect against common threats and vulnerabilities. So be proactive, get this stuff done, these policies in place. This isn't rocket science, promise you, but you don't want to be on the other side of the coin should something bad occur. So with that, I will open this thing up for Q&A if you guys have any. I apologize, went a little longer.
It's okay. We actually have it scheduled till 3:30. So I did see that we have a small crowd. So I'll, if you have a question or you want to ask a question, if you'll chat and I'll turn your voice on, we'll take turns and you can ask it. I see that Patty asked a question. I'm gonna allow you to talk, Patty. You can either chat.
Either way, through Q&A. There's a Q&A here.
Yeah.
Is there? Oh, chat. Okay.
Yeah, there's a chat. She has a question. Why does it matter if Windows is supported?
As it relates to HIPAA, why does it matter if Windows is supported? Well, because, for example, Windows 7 is no longer supported by Microsoft. It's not getting adequate updates. So it leaves you very vulnerable to hacking, to all sorts of unscrupulous IT garbage that can be downloaded onto that machine. And some of the worst finds I've ever seen have been because usually it's much larger groups. Some big group is using outdated, cheap technology sitting in front of systems storing thousands and thousands of health records. So Windows needs Windows, I think it's 8.1 Pro, or excuse me, 8.1 or newer is fine, but Windows 7 as of January, Microsoft does not support anymore, and it is more vulnerable to being compromised.
Okay, thank you. Looks like you've got another question. about OneDrive. Can you see it, or do you?
No, I do. So Microsoft OneDrive is HIPAA compliant, if that's the question. It's very popular to use Microsoft OneDrive because it does provide access controls. It does provide the auditing capability as well, if that's the question.
Yeah, it was our clouds such as a OneDrive and Dropbox.
Oh, here we go. Q&A. That's, yeah, I don't see the question, but in terms of OneDrive and Dropbox, OneDrive I know is, quote, HIPAA compliant. Dropbox is more of just a sort of a data repository. I use Dropbox myself, but if it depends on what you're putting in there, there wouldn't be anything wrong with putting just some documents in Dropbox as long as you're making sure that you're putting it within an encrypted folder inside of Dropbox, because Dropbox comes down on your regular PC, and if you got a ransomware virus, it's going to attack those Dropbox files. So if you're putting that stuff into a file within Dropbox, you really should be encrypting the one folder you're putting all those sensitive files in.
Okay. And then I think this might have been the same follow-up question to that, is even if OneDrive is encrypted or HIPAA compliant, do we still have to encrypt the individual folders to be on the safe side?
Not within the OneDrive portal. If you ever put anything on your desktop for whatever reason, so for example, if you're going to go see a patient, to go to their home, for example, and they have no internet, they live in a basement, you know, and you need to see some information, and you need to download it on your local device for whatever reason, then you would want to encrypt the actual drive at that point.
Okay, great. Well, I know, as I said, we've dealt with this quite a bit. And when we first set out years ago as a company to try and make sure, through one of my other companies, Diversified, that we were compliant, whether we were functioning as a covered entity or a business associate, because at times we were on both sides of the fence. Just the thought of how are we going to figure that out? How are we going to do a risks assessment? And how are we going to be sure that we've covered all our bases? And you help with that, don't you, Brian?
Yes. And here's the thing about are we a covered entity? Are we splitting hairs here? Covered entity, business associate. The bottom line is, regardless, we've got to comply with these HIPAA regulations. Really, the only major difference between a covered entity and a business associate would be breach notification, notifying the patient. So both are going to have assessments done, policies in place that, you know, lower their risk to reasonable and appropriate levels. And if you're a tiny, tiny little business, like one person, obviously, there's not a lot of working parts here. This isn't going to be it's not like we're auditing Bethesda Medical Center here. It would be a very somewhat simplistic process, just because there's not many working parts. But we do want to make sure the stuff that we do handle, that it is secured and that kind of thing. Online fax services. I see one here. There's a lot of online fax services, and many of them claim to be HIPAA compliant. Sending a traditional fax, believe it or not, is not against HIPAA, by the way. You can still send old traditional faxes. You don't have to use necessarily encrypted e-fax. You know, it's better to use that, but there's plenty of online fax services that do offer HIPAA compliance. I can't, you know, reel them off the top of my head, but there's a lot of them out there.
Okay. I'm not sure. We'll leave it open for another minute if anybody else has another question. I will say, if this is something that you're concerned about or you want to just feel like you've got a good feel on, Brian is working with MCA and he can help you personally. And I tell you, he has is structured to really fit with small businesses and help you get your procedures and your breach plan and everything taken care of. I know there's other services that do that as well, but it definitely might be worth considering if just to make sure you're not leaving anything exposed.
I see some familiar names I believe I worked with in the past, actually.
You may have.
Small world in the HIPAA business.
Well, yes, I will send you the, somebody asked about the slide presentation, and I will be happy to send you all, well, I have recorded the webinar. I don't know about the slide presentation itself.
Yeah, I can, that we can provide that, absolutely.
Sure. Okay, great. All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking time out today and sharing some knowledge with us. We do have another series. We have several series of HIPAA webinars diving deeper into some other subject matter with Brian coming up. And so if you're interested, feel free to join us for those.
All right. Well, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, if you do have any questions, just let Ginger know, and she'll get in touch with me, and I will get those answered accordingly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.